And welcome everybody to another episode of The Jungle and the Gardener. We've changed the name recently as a metaphor for the masculine and the feminine. Jenna, I'm here with my co-host, and she is here with a special guest who she's going to introduce in a few moments. Just kind of picking up where we left off last time, where we were talking about co-creative relationships and sort of the dynamism that is defining the relationship world out there today. A lot of people are sort of breaking away and from the sort of traditional model of what a relationship is, quote unquote, supposed to be. And so now we're going to have kind of like a follow on to the last conversation we had. We're going to be talking about the game of dating. But before we get into that, Jenna, why don't you introduce our special guest?
So this is Chris. He's coming to visit me from Virginia, and we met really randomly. We met on an app, and we both subscribe to alternative dating styles that are like, hey, where are you at? Where am I at? Let's decide together what we're creating versus, oh, we should be in this traditional dating style. So anyway, he's here in my hometown, Goddard, visiting. And
nice to meet you, Chris. Thanks for joining.
You want to introduce yourself in any other way?
No, I think you did a good job there. Okay. So, I think people will get to know me over time, but no, I think that was a good introduction.
Okay.
I'm Chris.
All right.
I'm Chris. He's Chris. So for today, he's Chris.
All right, great. Well, Jenna, I wanted to pick up on one thing that you just said. You were talking about alternative dating styles, and this actually leads to an interesting sort of way to frame the whole idea of we're playing the game of dating. Now, inside of sort of the ontological world that you and I always talk about is the ability to kind of engage with life from a place of play, to actually be able to gamify life, to see life not as this sort of rigid series of rules that everyone has to always agree on. It's a very finite sort of way of looking at things. So we can play all kinds of games, and one of the games that we play are relationship styles. So the idea of it being an alternative almost reinforces, don't you think, that there's a sort of mainstream acceptable and alternative is not that. And I'm thinking we invite our listeners to start looking at it through the lens of not alternative, but just a different game.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm always fumbling with wording, because when I started to date alternatively, which I don't even know if that's a term, I'm just using the words I have. There were so many acronyms to learn. It was like, as soon as I opened that door, I'm like, what does this acronym mean? I'm on a date and they're like, I'm GGG. I'm like, what does this mean? Like I had to Google things. I hired a coach for myself to help me through navigating alternative dating lifestyles, because it was just a lot. It was a lot. So our goal here is for me to share a little bit about my journey, because as I've been doing that, that's what brought us to this podcast. As I've been dating, not for the one, to just date and meet people and explore myself and explore them. It is alternative because it's not looking for the one. Oh, do you meet my list? And oh, you deserve the second date because you've met this criteria. This really genuine, alive, playing with life thing that you and I talk about, how to know yourself well enough to know how to engage with life without losing yourself.
Yeah. And we talked about last week, throwing out the lists, and not having sort of this prescribed expectation about what a relationship is supposed to be and not supposed to be, which would sort of lean into the alternative, right? So it's not supposed to be, it's an alternative, right? Nobody wants to be the alternative. They want to just be whole and complete in and of themselves, right? And so the invitation for everyone listening is there is this sort of period of time that we're going through right now, and have been for the last several years, where a lot of, not just in relationships, but a lot of sort of the traditional way of doing things are being challenged, because people are starting to kind of wake up and say, well, why do I have to conform to this or that? And truly, if you're coming from a place of liberation, which, as we've discussed, is sort of my thing, if you're coming from liberation, then you have to integrate play, you have to gamify things, you have to not be so rigid and stuck in a certain sort of way of living one's life. And so, we can gamify everything. We can gamify business. We can gamify our health. We can gamify our relationships. And so that's really the game that you're playing is a different game, but it's not an alternative, because to suggest alternative means there's like a primary, there's like a main, there's like a right. And I think historically that's been true. But I just read something the other day that somewhere in the neighborhood of around 20% of relationships now fall into these alternative sort of ways of doing relationships. That's a fifth of the population. And I think a lot of people are looking at the divorce rate of sort of the mainstream way of doing relationships, and they're saying, well, why are we doing this? Clearly, it's not working for at least more than half of the population. And yet everyone keeps wanting to play that game. So you're inviting people, you and Chris are inviting people to consider, not that it's just you're sharing your journey, it's consider there are other games of relationships you could be playing. I want to invite Chris into the conversation here to just kind of share with us a little bit, Chris, about what was it that made you kind of step in and say, you know what, I'm interested in exploring a different game as it pertains to relationships.
Yeah, I got into a really unorthodox way. And it wasn't always it wasn't the best way, but it really helped me, unfortunately, but positively at the same time. I got into infidelity. That's the way people oh, they did to spice up their marriage, or they did to spice the relationship. And unfortunately, I did it because I always felt I'm like it's not always all or nothing, right? And I always felt we looked at a lot of relationships as 0 or 100, right? And but you meet so many people, and it's they can bring so much value to you in your life in so many different ways, right? And we've just always, and I think the traditional mindset has always limited us into that, right? Oh, you have to be with this person and everybody else means nothing to you. And it's there's so many people on the planet, you can't tell me that that's not possible, right? So I explored probably a little bit too much without the proper consent. But what that did was it led me to therapy, right? And when it led me to therapy, I had to talk. I'll be honest, I didn't have the greatest therapist, but she did give me some great knowledge. And she was like, "Hey, the way you feel and the way you think isn't wrong." And when she told me that, it kind of validated that, okay, there is alternative methods, right? There is differences. It doesn't have to just be this one way. And because I'm not a stats guy, but like you said, the numbers say this is wrong, right? And then how many people we find out later on, when their spouse dies, they're oh, they wanted to do these things. And it's well, why didn't you ever do that? So now you're suppressing your happiness. You're suppressing who you really are. And it's for who though? Right? These people that really don't even care about your life, who are really not doing the same, who really thinking the same way you are, they just don't feel the openness to express that with other people. So I'm why don't we do this? We're changing our way of thinking on a lot of other things. Why haven't we done the relationships, marriages in this space? Right. We're raising kids differently now. We're using different resources for learning, but we need to adapt that to our relationship thinking and our relationship styles as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's naturally kind of bubbling up. It's just people are realizing, so many people, myself included, at some point in time, I fell into the trap of, well, you go through these sort of signposts of life. You go through primary school and you go to high school, and then maybe you go to college, or maybe you go get a job. But at some point it's, get married, have kids, and do the thing is sort of part of this sequence. And to your point, Chris, there's so many people who just feel like that's the only game in town. We're talking about, a different game, and sort of using that framework. And that's the only game in town. So I have no choice, is what a lot of people think. That and then they find themselves in a relationship and in a situation where, what I'm assuming you were experiencing, Chris, I can't explore all of the different facets of who I am inside of this very confined structure. It's just not working. But, so many people, because of our conditioning, aren't told, well, nobody says you have to go to that structure. Nobody says you have to live that way, but nobody tells us that. And so we just kind of fall into it. And I think there's more voices now coming up and are saying, you know what, this didn't work for me, so I'm doing something different, right? And this is inside of the relationship conversation, but inside of the bigger dialogue around liberation and how to live a liberated life in whatever area of your life. To your point, we're looking at all kinds of ways for people to express themselves, and this would be another way to do that. So,
Exactly.
Jenna, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I love that we're just having this conversation because as we spoke in the beginning of like, I'm dating these people, they're going through this, and it's all like everyone's just suffering in silence. And I know there's a lot of podcasts about this, but on the general public world, the clients I was seeing, the men I was dating, they still weren't having enough access to alternative options to even choose from, possibility. They're like, oh, I guess I'll just date this way, and like, there was one time where you're like, okay, other friends are like, well, why don't you just cheat like a normal person? Like, what's with this weird?
What's with this transparency and being open in terms of your communication?
As normal, like, and not to use normal, but anyway, go ahead.
No, I mean, if you look at movies, right? If the guy works at the office in a late night and his secretary, you always assume what's the next steps, right?
Right.
Why do we assume that? Because we've normalized cheating to the point where it's like, yeah, of course. They work late and she's remotely attractive. They're doing something, right? Oh, that's okay. He's the boss and that's the secretary. But if they said, hey, his wife knows that they're hooking up and she said it's okay. What? How dare she? It's ridiculous. We've normalized it to that point where like, if you make a movie like this, like, yo, this movie's weird.
Yeah.
Everybody's
but it's not weird to cheat.
Movie. Right. Yeah. So we've normalized it to that point. So it's like one of those things where it's like, I don't think I'm wrong because I'm like, I take a step back and I'm like, no, you just have a traditional mindset about things.
Sure. And that's the whole thing is no one's wrong. It's like, let's explore options. Let's explore possibilities. And I had an ex-boyfriend who was extremely jealous because he'd been cheated on. And he was very attuned to all these romantic comedies are based on cheating. It's like, there's the boyfriend, but they're like, oh, we want it to be the best friend from high school. And so it's actually just always about cheating. And I was like, oh.
So then we program everybody to have this cheating mindset, right? Like, oh, like, he's going to accidentally drop flowers. It's like.
And the one, like the whole thing we talked about with the one. So, it's like, what can we create as an authentic person? Right. And then, like I said, last call, like, how can we be ourselves together? And the thing is, like we talked about this earlier, like it's constantly evolving and changing. And so traditional relationships don't actually allow for that as far as I'm concerned. It's like, hey, we're together. I've got the ring.
Well, someone has to compromise themselves for the other person. I think that's what we see because the wife always like, oh, I had to give up this. The husband's like, oh, I couldn't do this because my wife or whatever, because she wanted to do this. And they're like, hey, if you guys would have had a conversation, either A, you guys would have realized you weren't for each other. B, made the necessary changes to your life where it's like, you don't have to have the kids right now. Hey, let her finish her career. Let him finish his career to get to a point where we're comfortable. And then we can do that. But the societal pressure tells us, hey, you guys have been together this long. You have to do it this way. Like how many people get pressured into marriage and then as soon as they get married, they're like kaput. Like we see all the time. And I don't know why we get so headstrong over this, like this like ring and this like thing, right? It's like, if you're doing it in a way that feels good for you guys, then keep doing it. Keep going with that. Like, but stop falling into this trap of like, you have to do it this way or you're a bad person. I never seen somebody on their headstones like they're a bad person because they lived a different life or they married somebody else. I never seen that. And we just get caught. I think it's the insecurity of being different. I think that's what it is. It's like you're gonna walk around different and everybody's gonna be like, but they secretly want that. They secretly want to explore that. And I know because people have told me this. It's like, man, how do you do that? I get DMs from my friends and text messages. They're like, oh man, how do you get to do that? And I'm like, when you do what? What do you mean? What am I doing?
I had that too. Like
I'm not doing anything.
Yeah. I'll say that in conversation. I'm like, hey, like I date in like an E&M way or poly. And I'm still exploring like to me, the labels don't describe me. Like as far as and we talked about that last call, like, or maybe it was offline, but so I just call it co-creative relationships. Like what works for me, like and I'm just going to keep exploring and doing and all that kind of thing. So anyway, we kind of digressed, but
and there's something interesting about that too. So I have this saying, I think I've mentioned before, don't negotiate, create. And I think that a lot of relationships are like negotiations. Right?
Yeah.
You're allowed to do this. I'm not allowed to do that. Right. And so so what happens in negotiation is the only thing that can ever happen is compromise. Every negotiation is fraught with compromise because both sides, to have a successful outcome to a negotiation, need to give something up. It's to the point you were making, Chris, that, I have to give something up I might want to do. They might have to give something up they want to do in their life. And so now we're in a compromised relationship. And I would say that that's probably most marriages are compromised relationships. Now, Esther Perel has also advocated for a way to, for those who want to be in a relationship with one person, her way of saying, dealing with it is that, and the way she articulated, she said, I've been married to the same person, or the same person, but 12 different times. So in other words, the person that she's married to and her have changed, I don't know if it's the exact number, but 12 different times over the course of the trajectory of their relationship. In other words, they've had to co-create. They've had to say, if we're going to stay together and not compromise what I want to do, what you want to do, we have to learn to evolve together. And that's not something everyone can do. And it takes an enormous amount of communication, an enormous amount of fluidity and flexibility in the relationship. And so that's another option as well, right? But some people aren't willing to do that. Some people are so identified, like, well, this is, who I am. And if you can't be with me, then we can't be together. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And we talked about control and curiosity, right? So like to live a curious lifestyle requires you to face something like your insecurity. What if I'm not enough? Or like, can I say this thing? And is that going to mean the relationship ends because I've now said this authentic thing? And so it's like those skills of being a whole person that we talk about, like to be authentically confident, are part of dating this way. But I think as you date this way, you do grow. Like you can like learn the things, read the books, follow our podcast, maybe, we have some advice on this. And that's what brought us to this podcast. It was like, we're talking and I was like, I'm dating these guys that are like divorced and I'm noticing this. And I was like, yeah, I noticed the same with my friends. And here we are. We've created this out of curiosity, out of like, this is a conversation people need to have.
Yeah, well, I just think if people stay connected to creativity. So on the other side of negotiation, where only compromise is possible, inside of creation, consensus is possible. And that consensus can take many forms because it's two consenting people who are creating consensus, right? So whatever two people agree on, what does it matter what the form looks like? And I think that's really the point. In Esther Perel's model, they were always seeking the next consensus 12 different times. Had they not been able to reach that consensus, my guess is, having watched and listened to her for years, that would have been the end of it. And they would have moved on if they couldn't reach a consensus because she's unwilling to compromise, right?
Yeah.
And so many people, out of fear, like Chris was saying, from a validation standpoint, seeking the approval, the validation of others, the society, etc., are willing to compromise themselves in order to get that validation.
Yeah, that's like trained, right? Like being liked, not being rejected. It's so primal.
Yeah. Chris, did you want to say something?
No, I was going to say, I think you see it all the time. People like, I think Jenna says it quite often, is they shrink themselves, right? Like you'll see people who go in and they say, oh, I want to do this, I want to do these things. And they want to do great things for themselves, but they're like, well, I won't get a partner. And I was like, dude, like you'll find somebody. Just the law of probability says you'll find somebody if you just kind of stay authentic to who you are, right? It might not be easy, but even if you're like this fake person, is it easy? And I think it goes back to that even type thinking, like, oh, well, if I'm this fake person, I'll find somebody that's easy. Or like loving the person that I actually want to be with is going to be like the person that people think I want to be with and the person I actually want, right? The person I actually want may not be on the cover of the magazine. That person may not make $250,000, right? But to check the boxes, a person is, and you can never find that person because you're not being authentic about who you really want to be with. You're just being with the person who society tells you the blonde hair, blue eyes, quote unquote, right?
Right.
Person, and that's not really the person that makes you happy, but that's the person that people look at on your Instagram or whatever thing it is. Yeah, I'm on a couple goals, right? But it's like that's not the person. It's the person who's like she goes and does whatever X, Y, and Z, or like he does X, Y, and Z. He doesn't have like the glamorous job, but he takes care of you. He makes you feel good, And it's like, no, I don't want him. He's not swollen buff. and he's not over 6'5", right? So it's like, you have to understand that going into and understand yourself and knowing what you truly want and what truly makes you happy. I think we look at what people think makes us happy and not what actually makes us happy.
Yeah. And there's this strong pull in our society. This is also part of our conditioning for everyone to be the same, because it validates the insecurities of everyone else, right? And something that you said, Chris, that made me think of this aphorism that we often use, this birds of a feather flock together. I mean, if you're connected to your authentic self and you're showing up authentically and you don't compromise yourself, then the kind of people that will want to be in relationship with you, whether it's romantic or friendships or work, I mean, any of these types of relationships, will start to flock around you, to use the proverbial saying, and then you won't need to compromise yourself. I think part of getting rid of the list is also getting rid of the list of what kinds of relationships are even tolerable or acceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely spot on with that. I would second that for sure. Like, I think people, I never even thought about it in that perspective. Like, even though I lived that way, I never thought about it that way, like checking the boxes of like, because even like, I don't even feel like I need to even say anything after that. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Mic drop, Chad.
Yeah. Too bad it's hanging on this arm and connected to the wall.
It's like one of those things you just don't think about, It's just like.
But that's the point, right?
Yeah,
that's the point of our podcast. Like, let's think about it. Yeah.
Because I mean, like, you think about so much in your life. Like, this is the one thing. It's like, everybody's done it. Here's the blueprint for success. Let's follow it, right? But you know that now you get deeper in the weeds of it. It's like, well, they have a chink in armor there if they did this, or they chink in. Well, all right, wait, hold up. This is not even armor. This is just a hollow blanket over them. But we think it's armor, and it wasn't. And it's like, well, if they were honest with themselves, they probably would have been with somebody else who's not. Their parents probably wouldn't have approved of. Society probably wouldn't have approved of. And they're doing it the ways people wouldn't have approved of. So. But we all realize that these people are not as important if they don't accept you for who you are. And I think we give too much mental space to people who don't really care about us like we think they do. Because if you showed me that who you were, it wouldn't matter if you were what type of relationship you were. Like, all my friends who I talk about it with, they're not like, I'm not your friend, Chris, because of this, right? But there's some people who will be. Guess what? I'm okay with losing them because I don't want to compromise who I am to make somebody else happy for like 10 seconds a year. I see them at a family reunion. Right. So
the unwillingness to compromise is really where people have to get to, and they have to be able to stand strong in who they are. Now, this goes to another challenge, Jenna, that you and I talk a lot about, which is so few people actually even know who they are because they're repressing that, they're denying the naturalness that is showing up, and they make it wrong because we're so attached to conforming, to being liked, that we bend and contort ourselves into all kinds of shapes, and then think about the mental health breakdowns that we're creating, and the disease. Like, there was this great book a number of years ago that came out. I think it was called The Body Keeps Score. I think was what it was called. Score,
yeah.
The Body Keeps Score. And when we put ourselves in stress, because we always will experience stress whenever we're not being authentic to who we are.
Exactly.
And you repress that over years and years and years, and eventually it's going to come out one way or another. It's going to come out in reaction or anger or something like that. It's going to come out in, like you were saying earlier, Chris, cheating and affairs that are going to be like, screw this, I can't deal with this anymore. Or it's going to come out in disease, right? The body keeps score, so you'll manifest disease. And so I look at all of the problems that we have from a wellness, a mental wellness, a physiological wellness in our society right now. And I know for a fact that, they say stress is the silent killer, and the amount of stress that people are just stuffing down because they're not living authentically to themselves. And they haven't even done the work to figure out, what does that even mean for me? What is authentic for me?
Exactly. They'll blame, like, okay, it's the job or it's the partner, right? Like, it's obviously the amount of clients, right? They're just on the brink of divorce. And that's why we talked about couples counseling. Like, I like working with people. They're like, we really like each other. We really love each other. Like, how do we make this work versus most people go into counseling to break up.
Yeah.
Right. So like having this,
or to blame the other person and be able to point the finger.
And this is the thing, the blame. It's like, it must be you. Like the ability to look at themselves, and that's what I bring them back to, and that's what you bring them back to, isn't there. It's like, it must be you, because we've been externally motivated as a society. If I look like this, if I have this, I'm winning. And so then I'll feel good, and then I won't be rejected, and then I won't freeze or be eaten or die, which is like this primal fear of abandonment, right? So
I also want to go back to this thing that we were sort of touching on earlier with the Esther Perel example of the 12 different men in one man that she's been with, which speaks to the fact that a lot of people get super attached to who they are, as though who they are is this unchanging, immovable object. Right.
Yeah.
And we're, all of us are human becomings. Like, we're always evolving. We're always learning. We're always having new experiences that we need to adapt to. And I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And so if the conventional model of a relationship is unable to be flexible enough to accommodate each person's becoming, then that's probably not a model for you.
Exactly. And that's part of where you're going to eat the stress to keep the relationship good, because that's what we call winning. I was talking to a friend, and she's like, why is longevity the metric of success for a relationship? We've been together 25 years, not how'd it go?
How did it go? Yeah.
Like,
and we fought for 24 of them.
We're winning. Like, it's just like authentic living, like inspiring each other, like moving through the hard times. Like, it's not talked about as much.
Like, what if you had a 3-year relationship with someone that was the most romantic, all in, like no holding back, and then you burnt it out, and it was like, that was great, let's move on.
But you know what everybody's going to say? Then you guys weren't really in love.
Yeah, or you're not the one.
Or they're like, why did it end then if it was so great?
Yeah.
But you guys, I think part of it is because you guys were so honest. You're like, hey, we hit our wall. We had a great 3 years. Like, if somebody said, would you have, like, I think it goes back to, I don't know if you were leading to this point, but if somebody asked me, would you have really 3 great years or 10 not so great ones, like awful? And I'm like, let's take 3 great and figure out the next 7, right? Like, I'll take that, because we know that, like you said, stress is a silent killer, but also like peace, like makes you feel like, hey man, these days are the greatest days of my life, you know? But 10 years is like even if you say, hey, you're going to expire after these 3 years, or you're going to expire after these 10, I think a lot of people will still take the best 3 years of your life or the worst 10.
Right.
It's a no-brainer, right? And I think relationships are just like that as well. Like, the best 3 or the worst 10.
Yeah, on that point, we have there was that song that was written years ago. I think Tim McGraw did, or something, Live Like You're Dying. That song, right? But we have that saying. And everyone's like, yeah, live like you're dying. And then, so ask the question, okay, so are you living inside of your relationship as though you might die tomorrow? Right? I mean, are you playing all out? And so few people can say yes to that, because they're just like we always talk about, Jenna, like, most people are living lives by default. They're tolerating lives by default. That it's their life is what can they tolerate, not what brings them aliveness and makes them come alive. And that, to me, is the most uninspired way that someone can possibly live a life. And so a lot of relationships are falling into that trap.
Yeah, actually, it reminded me of something about emotional diversity. I mean, I just kind of make up terms sometimes where it's like, let's not feel sad. Let's not feel grief, like bad feeling. Whereas like, if you're really authentically living, like, oh my God, you've changed. Now I'm sad. Oh my God. Well, we're on this high kick. We're in this, but to have this, like, we're happy is another component to it of living an authentic relationships. Like, I can be with you if you're like mopey, because I don't have to make it mean anything about me, but like this emotional ability to be whole humans, the emotions are our guidance system to our truth when we're not stuffing them down. And so that live like you're dying is to also follow authentic emotions. But again, we're not taught that way. We're hoping to help with that, but we're not taught like an authentic emotion that's like really talking to you, that's really pulling you towards a more authentic experience, to the more congruent friendships that are going to help you be more you, right? And not be like, oh, what's wrong with you? just because they can't be with you. They can't be with who your reality is. And so anyway, emotions are a guide to this authentic living. And in relationship, the ability to be with all the emotions is going to be part of that.
Yeah. So being that the Jungle and the Gardener podcast is just to remind everyone, so the jungle is sort of the metaphor for the divine feminine, the feminine energy, this think of a jungle, this creativity, this expansiveness, this growth, this unstoppable creative energy. And then you have the gardener, which is the metaphor for the masculine. And the job of the gardener is to take care of the jungle and to turn it into a garden, to basically help to be the container. Another model or metaphor I've used for this is, I think I shared this with you once, Jenna, when I was in Mexico, and I was like looking at this pool, and I was like, oh my gosh, the feminine is like the water. It's flowy. It's nonconformist. It's always moving. It's always in motion. It's dynamic.
Emotional.
It's emotional. Yeah. And then the pool perimeter, like the actual concrete part of the pool, that's the container. That's the masculine. It holds the feminine energy. And so let's look at this whole idea that we've been talking about today. I'm kind of springing this on us, but let's see what we can come up with here. Is there a distinction between the masculine and the feminine in terms of these co-creative or these dynamic relationships? Like, how does a woman, in your opinion, from your perspective, Jenna, get to show up more as a woman in this context? And maybe Chris, from your perspective, from the masculine or the male perspective, what is it like to hold a container inside of a relationship style or model that is fluid and not fixed?
Yeah, so I think in the way that context that we're thinking of, the masculine and feminine doesn't have a male and a female, right? So by that I mean is like, she might be the breadwinner, she might be the one who hits the gym the more, she might be the strong one physically, right? Does that make her more masculine? You're not tied to that, right? The feminine has to be this way, or like, hey, he's the one who cooks, does the dishes, like, cleans the house. Those traditional roles are not traditional anymore, right? Like, she can go and do the labor job, and he's the one who's behind the computer, right? So I think that's how it shows up, I think, now in terms of the masculine and feminine. But I think there's also spaces where, like, he's still the masculine person, quote unquote, and she's still the feminine person, quote unquote. I just think you're not stuck in like this one way, and you're not stuck in this one. Now it's like this, or like, it's just the fluidity, right? So I think that's how it shows up now. And I think also, the biggest way it has to show up now for these relationships to work is in terms of like a traditional man being more emotional, and then a woman also like matching that. And I think when you guys can see that like eye to eye in terms of like your level of emotion and the emotional capabilities in terms of like understanding what that person needs, then it can lead to that success in a fluid type relationship.
Okay, great. Jenna, what about you?
Yeah, well, what was great about what you said was like those traditional masculine, feminine roles that we see, right? Whereas, we could be any sex, any relationship style, and have feminine energy, masculine energy. So as a woman, to like answer it, for me, because it was these pre-prescribed, blueprints you had said, which is actually good. And I said like non-trajectory, whatever else I said, it was complicated to listen to. But, I, instead of losing myself, it's like being open enough to find the right container, like versus like, well, that's not the container and that's not the container. And like, well, screw it, I'm going to do it myself. Like, which a lot of women in my particular arena of like, I have a good job. I don't need a man, but like, I want that. I want to soften. I want to not be on all the time. So for me, it was like trying to find a match, trying to find a guy. Like, what got me into the alternative dating lifestyle was like, I'm just single for like 7 years. Like, okay, I'm not meeting anybody. I'm like, well, this isn't working. And then I started to listen to my spirit. I started to listen to like feminine intuition instead of going, this is dating. Okay, I'm going to go on the apps. I'm going to like look for, 6'5" is the tall version. But I laugh because he's 6'5". Like, so here it's not like just 6 foot over 6 foot, but like I started to get creative. I started to get curious. I started to use my feminine energy in dating. And if it's a no, it's a no. If it's we've made a date, but I'm like, well, I'm just not feeling it. And it's not resistance. It's not fear, because you have to determine, is this like, oh, I'm about to meet somebody that's going to change my life and I'm having resistance to it. And these are all things that are really subtle distinctions that we talk about. But for me, it gave me the like open ocean possibility again of like how this is going to happen, but I'm going to be me. They're going to be them. And I'm going to opt in or opt out. And I said, like, subscribe, like Netflix, like, is this working? Nope. Okay. And like, it's not about like, oh, you don't meet my metrics, so off with you. It's like, can I be me? Can you be you? Are we navigating this? Are we growing? So that's kind of for me how like the relationship style has allowed me to be more feminine, actually. And it's not like even the apps and stuff like that feel really kind of masculine, like yes, no, blah, blah, blah.
Very
blah,
fixed.
But I use my skill set as an intuitive vibe. Look at their face, look at their eyes. I can feel their energy, and like all of us can do that. And that feminine energy allows that, like, to know what can't be proven.
Yeah.
So that for sure.
And I think the underlying premise too, if you go back to the lists and probably what you were experiencing over those 7 years, is people approach the list with all of this sort of heaviness of, well, I better be pretty accurate about this list because I'm looking for the one.
Exactly.
And if
There's
I
so many
mess
books
up
about it too.
Yeah. If I mess up, then I got to go through all this, this trauma, trauma.
Yeah. And hard work versus a feminine magnet. I'm going to go to the paint and wine night. I'm going to go to a surf thing. I'm going to be me, not to meet somebody. Because you see these dating things like, oh, all the men are here, so do this thing that's inauthentic to you. Now, in certain cases, that could be authentic. Let me be spontaneous. Let me try something. But clear your closet to make room for them. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like that's like kindergarten version, feminine power. But like feminine power is like presence. Like, I'm going to trust this moment, and then I'm going to let that lead me with the emotions, with the intuition, kind of stuff.
I want to say something though. I do think the feminine power is a container as well. Like, and I think that's what when I say fluidity, the feminine power can be also the container, and the masculine can also be the fluid. Right? I don't think that it's stuck in one way or another because a woman could be so powerful to that person, right? She can be the container that he might need at that time. He might not be able to be like, quote unquote, he might be a fluid, right? And she might be a container, and that's what they need to be. And I think that's how we have to look at it as well. Is that, hey, he might need a container because he's so fluid, and vice versa. So I think that's also, in terms of like the box checking, is how you have to look at it too, right? Because he might be a fluid, right? And the thing is, we see is like, well, he's so da-da-da and she's so, but they work because he allows her to be a container and she allows him to be a fluid.
Would that not, in that situation, wouldn't that mean though that the biological man has more of a feminine system, and then the biological woman has more of a masculine system?
But I think that's because we have the traditional mindset of what men, in fact, masculine and feminine is, right? But we've also seen like very feminine women do extremely masculine things and still maintain their femininity, right? And vice versa, right? So I don't know if that's more like a traditional mindset or like what we just programmed to think what is one and what's the other. I understand like biological. I do understand that. Yeah. But in terms of like relationships, I don't know if we can say that because we created these things in terms of like what the man is supposed to do and what the woman's supposed to do in a relationship. Right. Yeah. But like obviously, like in terms of child rearing and childbearing and stuff like that, like obviously now that's when the biological comes into place. And now we can talk about like, yes, the man is going to be the one who, I think we can, birds and bees, different conversation, but you get what I'm saying. But in terms of like like what we say used to deem a traditional masculine role is the breadwinner or the stay-at-home mom. Now it's the male in the relationship is like sometimes now we're seeing it. It's so common, it's not kind of weird anymore. Or like the woman's like she's the one who works a lot and brings home the bacon and all these things, or she works at a construction site, right? So like now, and what if he's a secretary or a nurse? Is he feminine now because he's a nurse or a secretary? No. Is she a man because she works in a construction site? No. But I think we have these traditional mindsets of what these people need to be. So that's why I said the fluidity can still change and the containers can still change.
Yeah, the roles definitely. And I think we've seen that over years that women are adopting so many roles that used to be male roles.
Yeah.
And they're doing it just fine. Well, we're going to take a real quick break and then come back with some takeaways. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to the Jungle and the Gardener. We want to leave you with some takeaways today with our conversation with Jenna and Chris. We're going to go to Chris first and then Jenna, and then I'll leave you with something as well. Chris, go ahead. Take it away.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys having me on the show. And I would just say my biggest takeaway is be open to explore. Like be in your relationships, in your career, whatever it may be. Just have an open mind. Like, hey, that platform, you're like, oh, is this? Be open to it, right? Hey, this person, I'll never meet people there. Be open to it. You know, open your mind to creativity in terms of like your relationships, the way you date, and your dating style, and the way you're going to pursue your relationships in the future. Be creative to the way you communicate with your partner. You don't always have to have a verbal conversation. You might guys have to do things a different way through music, right? So be open to creativity in terms of exploring new ideas and options in your relationship.
Okay, great. Jenna, what about you?
So mine is like, for me, when I started to date this way, it was like, okay, I'm going to go like erase the rules, but also was very cognizant to not lose myself. So it's easy to just jump into a new identity. I'm E&M, I'm poly, I'm this. And it was like a lot to take in to be like, I don't know what I am. I don't even know if I want to like give myself this one title. So I would go on a date and then be like, was I me? Did I lose myself there? Like, who was I being? And I, want to also say like, not in a super heady way, like a really in tune journal check-in way. And then that would lead to the next date. And literally it was like so fast. There was one time where this one guy would like do something to turn me off. And I'm like, that's an F no. Like just like a disrespectful, selfish, like an F no moment. And and the next day, the other guy is like using the exact same language in the synchronistic way of like receiving the exact thing. I was like, no to you, because I deserve this to receive this. This other person who's like, boop, I'm going to give you this. Like, and it wasn't because I said it. It was just the ability to receive. So that level of personal accuracy allowed me to receive more. So you just be open. You got to be open and check in.
Yeah. And my takeaway is, Pablo Picasso once said that a painting is never complete. And actually he was known for painting a painting. And then everyone's like, oh, I love that. Can I buy that? And he's like, well, maybe you can, but and sometimes he wouldn't let them because he would just keep painting over it and over and over. And they found with some of his paintings that they can strip away layers and find paintings under paintings under paintings. Like he was just always sort of. And to me, that's a metaphor for what it truly means to be a creator, that, you're not fixed in your life. You're not this fortress, this immovable object, this identity, this egoic identity. We talk about all the time the distinction between creating and consuming. And so many relationships, people are just consuming the relationship. They're consuming how it's supposed to be. They're consuming other people's validation of what their relationship is. They're consuming the structure of it and all of these different things versus being the generator or the creator of what is the relationship that serves them. And to answer that question, you have to know, who am I? So that's where the ontological work and the being-based work and sort of some of that deeper stuff is going to be very helpful for people who are listening and watching. Throw the checklist away. That checklist you're consuming that checklist from outside. You're consuming it from what other people say is a perfect relationship. And yet, as we've seen in the stats, so few relationships are thriving right now. So what's perfect about them if they're not thriving? So if aliveness is what you're after, if thriving is what you're after, chuck the checklist, get rid of it, and go within and ask, who am I? What makes me come alive? What serves me? And that may be, it may be a traditional marriage. It may be a marriage like Esther Perel's, which is, yeah, we're married, but we were 12 different people and we were always willing to walk away. Or it may be, no, I'm not actually going to lock myself into a contract with one person. I want to actually, have this ability to be dynamic and to evolve. And I would argue that even if you're in a traditional marriage, if you don't have that ability to evolve, you're going to hit a brick wall at some point. And that brick wall is going to be the wall of yourself, not thriving. So something to consider. Any final words before we break?
Yeah, because I wanted to say I find a lot of clients suffer with the word selfish.
Yeah.
I was even talking about the word self-relationship, and the one person was like, well, she was just rejected it in her entire body. Because I
tell people to be selfish all the time.
Exactly. But it's going to work out. It's like, then you can give from overflow, a bunch of other things we don't have time to say, but look at the word selfish and be willing to put it aside for a little bit, and know that when you're your full and complete self, you're serving everyone around you. It's just a law of nature.
Well, I think we can talk about selfish on another podcast, because I love telling people to be selfish and they lose their mind. And I'm like, it's a simple thing, man. We've all heard it. Put your own oxygen mask on the plane first so you can help other people. If you're not selfish, you're useless to the rest of the world, because you're going to be too myopically preoccupied on assuaging your own drama and stuff. So you're never going to be able to be of any use to anyone else. We can get into that.
And when we should get into the sexual part of it, because when you get to know your own body and you get to know your own, all of that sexual side of things, makes you a better partner, right? So totally. Another leg to that.
Let's talk about selfishness in sexuality on another show. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Chris, it was great having you. Jenna, as always, nice to see you again. And check us out on another episode of The Jungle and the Gardener. We'll see you next time.
That concludes this episode of The Most Important Conversations. This in-depth conversation could set you on the path to self-improvement, which is essential if you want to be an effective leader and take meaningful action in your life. If you enjoyed this episode and want more of these stimulating discussions, you can find them at TMICglobal.com. Remember, the world is at a crossroads right now. You can't afford to waste this opportunity to take charge of your life, build meaningful relationships with others, and co-create a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.